As soccer takes center stage this summer, Comcast helps bring the experience home to America. As the exclusive Spanish-language home of the tournament in the U.S., Telemundo is set to present its most expansive coverage ever. 700 hours of programming, live on-site presence at all 104 matches. And with multi-view and real-time 4K, Xfinity will deliver the most innovative and immersive sports viewing experience for fans watching on Telemundo, Peacock, Fox, and FS1. Learn more at ComcastCorporation.com.
4th of July savings are happening now at the Home Depot with select appliances starting at $398. Plus, get free delivery on appliance purchases of $398 or more, no membership required. Upgrade your kitchen with a modern and sleek GE Profile refrigerator featuring hands-free autofill for the perfect pour every time. And make laundry day easier with 2-in-1 washer-dryer combo innovation that completes laundry in about 90 minutes. Shop top brand appliances now at the Home Depot. Offer valid June 17th to July 8th, U.S. only. See store online for details.
This episode is brought to you by Google Chrome. You think you know a browser, but Gemini and Chrome? That's new. It can help you with practically anything on the web, like restoring a vintage motorcycle from a 50-page restoration blog, or finally break down that long article you've had open for weeks. Gemini and Chrome is here for it. Ready to make anything online make sense? There's no place like Chrome. Check responses, setup required, compatibility and availability varies, 18+.
A blogging, tweeting, baseball man. Just sit back and listen, you'll become a fan. I'm a C70 junkie, a C70. I'm a C70 junkie, a C70. I'm a C70 junkie, a C70. Oh. And now your host, Daniel Shoptaw.
Good evening. Welcome into another edition of Conversations with C70. I'm Daniel Shoptaw at C70 on Twitters. And tonight joining me is Randall Sullivan. He has written the book, The First All-Star Game, Babe Ruth, FDR, and America at the Crossroads. Very appropriate since the All-Star Game is next week. And Mr. Sullivan, I was doing a little bit of research. I'm as you do, you hit the Google button, and I find a Randall Sullivan that has written about Michael Jackson and Tupac and all this. And I kind of felt like I was running into the wrong person, but that's you. You've got quite an extensive background in writing.
I do indeed. I've been doing it for a long time.
And Pulitzer's nominations as well, if I'm correct.
4 of my books have been nominated.
So, I mean, those are obviously very different subjects than baseball in general and a historical perspective of baseball in particular. What led you down that road?
Well, I've been writing more history in recent times. The Curse of Oak Island and Graveyard of the Pacific were both historical. This one, though, I mean, it came out of a number of things. One of them, the last book I had published, was a very dark book, scary book, and I didn't want to go back to that. Also, I was not feeling good about the state of the country, and I was looking for something to cheer me up, basically. And I realized, the country has come through worse things than the level of polarization and animosity between people that exists today. It is, and it has survived it. And one of those apocalypses that it survived was the Great Depression. I started reading about the Great Depression, and I realized that it all bottomed out and began to tick back up in the late spring and early summer of 1933. Aside from the policies of the new Roosevelt administration, there were 2 events that stood out as significant in that time. One was the Chicago World's Fair, which was a global event, really. But the other was this baseball game that was played as an exhibition as part of the Chicago World's Fair. I love baseball. I played it every summer from 7 to 17. So I thought, wow, maybe there's something there. And the more I read, the more I realized that this really was a game that was more than a game. It didn't just inaugurate a tradition, it marked a turning point in American history. And the sense of uplift that it provided uh, really stirred the soul of the country and was part of this turnaround that America managed to pull off after 3.5 years of a deep dive.
Yeah, and it is very interesting because, of course, as a baseball fan, heard about the first All-Star game, kind of have a general idea of, the sports writer coming together, trying to, create a spectacle. But you're digging deep. I'm only about 100 pages into this, but I mean, you are completely setting the stage with FDR and with Judge Landis, Babe Ruth, everybody. It's quite a in-depth look at what turned out to be, a lasting part of the game.
Yeah, well, I mean, I wanted to write, a book about this baseball game, but I also wanted to write a book about the America that this baseball game was played in, um, and the condition of baseball at that time, which was just about as bad as it was for the rest of the country.
Mhm.
Um, so, for me, truly setting the scene involved all of that historical background. I mean, really the linchpin of the book when I realized I was going to do it, because I could, combine baseball history with American history, was when I just realized that the series of events that triggered the All-Star game began with an attempted assassination of Franklin Roosevelt. And I thought that was a great way to connect it all.
Yeah, it's a fascinating. Again, you pick up a book on the history of baseball, and you don't expect that to be your first paragraph or your first chapter, but it's engrossing to start there and to find out and just to follow these threads as they come together, and to learn parts of not only American history but some of baseball history that aren't necessarily um, well covered or well known. I mean, you get into a lot of the background on Babe Ruth's history that, as you even point out in the, especially at that time, but even since then, has been a little bit whitewashed to kind of prop up his image.
Yeah, well, I mean, part of what Babe Ruth so compelling to the American people was that he was a true up from under story. He came from difficulty. They didn't delve into the really dark aspects of that difficulty going back to his childhood, but it was there in the record, and so I mean, it was part of the story, and a lot of the history of baseball was in some ways setting up the arrival of Babe Ruth, because uh, the live ball era, baseball changed dramatically, and it was
Mhm.
because it went from dead ball to live ball. But the single biggest thing that happened was Babe Ruth. He truly just he transformed the game and became the biggest figure in the history of American sports. I really didn't realize until I was working on this book how enormous a figure Babe Ruth was, that there's never been a comparable figure in American sports.
No, and I don't imagine, especially now, that there ever could be, just because baseball had a captured America in a way that nothing else does now. I mean, National Football League has the eyeballs perhaps, but I don't know that it captures the imagination the way that baseball did in the 20s.
I think that's a fair thing to say. I mean, baseball was the game in
Mm,
1933. It was, 10 times, more than 10 times bigger than professional football and basketball combined. So that in today there's a lot of popular sports, and yes, football is now the most popular, but it's still a very divided
mhm,
field with many other sports competing for interest. But baseball was truly transcendent then. The best football players, the best basketball players, the best soccer players, chose to play Major League Baseball if they could, because that was where the attention and the money was.
yeah. Yeah, that and boxing, and it was a lot less painful to play baseball, so,
Yeah.
that worked out pretty well. Um, so how did you go about writing the book? I mean, what how did your research look?
Well, it was interesting for me because I was writing about something where there was nobody to interview.
Mhm,
Everybody who participated in any way in that game is long dead. So you have only the historical record. But I was doing it in a time where almost everything's been digitized. You can look at any newspaper from going back to the beginning of the 20th century. And I was writing it, when the subject was baseball, and I truly came to appreciate, and I can't say enough about the scores and scores and scores of amateur historians who have
Mhm.
preserved the record of baseball and put it online. Some of the websites that collect baseball history are just astounding in the depth of their detail. I mean, there's a lot of them, and one stands out above all others, and that's the Society for American Baseball
Mhm.
Research.
Yeah, I mean, Saber's done, I mean, amazing work throughout throughout its history, and really getting into the bios and the history of the game has been. I mean, I don't know where we'd be without
Well, I don't know what I'd have done without it.
them.
I went. Saber was, and anyone who reads the bibliography will recognize, was a prominent source. But this great game, uh, you know, baseball reference, numerous others. I mean, I went back to baseball reference. I don't know, at least, I don't know, 5,000 times in the course of working on this book. I mean, and it was amazing to me that you could just type in uh, a, a game played on a date in 1926, and there it would be. I mean,
Yeah.
uh, at a minimum, there'd be a full box score with a description of the game, but very often there'd be, uh, lots of other information. And then you could go to the next day's date in the newspaper where that game was played, and you could read a full account in the paper.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things I've always loved about baseball is the fact that it's got such a deep history, a history that connects, right? It's not completely. I mean, obviously, the dead ball era and live ball era, steroid era. There are eras, if you will, but you can still have that run through. You can still compare Babe Ruth to Hank Aaron or Barry Bonds. I mean,
Yeah.
you have to make some adjustments, but yeah, you can do that comparison, and that's mainly because of the work, like you said, historians have done, but the fact that there's been so much baseball writing throughout the years, whether it's been in newspapers or in books or anything like that, and I think that's something that no other sport really has.
I agree with that. I mean, I came to believe, that baseball is loved more deeply than
Mm,
any other game. I mean, not that fans are obviously rabid about college and NFL football,
right.
and but the the love people have for baseball is, I don't know, it's closer to an almost a spiritual thing.
Mhm.
It's so ingrained in this country's history. It's so much a part of the fabric of America in a way no other game is.
Yeah, and I mean, again, I'm biased. I'm a baseball fan and not really much of a fan of other sports, but it feels to me that baseball gets passed down in a way that other sports don't. I mean, I'm sure that football fans, they're a fan of that team because their dad was a fan of that team, perhaps. But there's just something about baseball. Maybe because you can go out and play catch. Maybe because you can play little league with your dad as a coach or something of that nature. That just has more of a family connection, I think, than some other sports.
I think there is a romance to
Mm,
baseball because you feel like connected to this thing, this game that goes all the way back into America's roots. And yeah, I mean, everybody has played at least some baseball, at least a catch, uh,
mhm,
and so I mean, everybody relates, and a lot of, I think, we relate to uh, sports. A lot of us do, through our
right.
memories of playing them. I grew up in the era when it was football, basketball, baseball, and I was one of those kids who played football, basketball, baseball, year round.
Right.
Um, uh, but there's a nostalgia that I feel myself just for baseball, for those summer days, and those first games under the light once when I was a teenager, and
Mhm.
that touches something in you that uh, no other game does. There's a connection to literature and poetry that you feel almost inherently in the game. It's a better game to write about, I think, than
Yeah.
than say football or basketball.
And the idea of, I mean, basically, I know we do have a pitch clock now, but the idea that there is not that time limit, that it kind of goes at its own pace. It allows for you to think between pitches, to discuss between pitches, to write a narrative that builds in a different way, that doesn't have that tension of a countdown clock on it.
Yeah.
I think that just is the people approach things differently that way.
The duel between the pitcher and the hitter is singular.
Mhm.
I mean,
Right.
baseball, there's nothing that really compares to that, direct, uh, uh, facing each other with such, with such different intentions. And also, I mean, baseball has been changed in some ways. I'm really a purist and a traditionalist about it. I
Mhm.
became one, especially during this book. I mean, I think they should keep, try to keep everything as much the same as possible because I think it's the most fair thing to those who came before. There's
Right.
no way. I mean, even the asterisk on Roger Maris's home run
Mhm.
record, as if there was something cruel about that, and maybe it was done cruelly, by maybe that was the
Mhm.
intention of some people, but there's a big difference between hitting 60 home runs in 154 games and hitting 60 home runs in 162 games. That's eight more games,
Mhm.
and uh, and so any of those you know deviations from the standard norm somehow takes away from the our ability to keep a through line, a continuity. And, I mean, and it's been really expressed, of course, in the refusal of the Hall of Fame to, uh, you know, allow players who are believed to have,
Mhm.
cheated, use steroids, admission. But
Yeah.
I mean, the All Star game is a good example because interleague play has really, which was probably good for the pocketbooks of or
Mhm.
the bank accounts of the owners and the players, but it's taken something away from the fans in that the All Star game isn't quite as meaningful as it was back in the days when you only got to see the American League stars and the National League stars going against each other during the All Star game.
Yeah, yeah, and you were talking about comparativeness, and I think of that All-Star game in that regard as well, because, I mean, it's a smaller thing. It's obviously not anything like the Maris record, but you hear these things of, a player that was able to hit 30 home runs before the All-Star break. Well, 20, 25, 30 years ago, that meant 80, 81 games. Now it's, 95 games. There's a whole lot more difference. And we still use those markers of the All-Star game, even though the schedule starts a week or two earlier and the game is a week or two later.
Yeah, there seems to be a determination to make what is happening now seem greater. But
Mhm,
uh, I mean, obviously, even in writing this book, I'm recognizing the validity of history. But I really became deeply attached to those players from that time, and felt an obligation to make their stories and the things
mhm,
that they had to come through to make it to Major League Baseball understood to people, because these guys really had to uh, they had to scrap and struggle and kind of deal with a lot more of ordinary existence than players do today. I mean, there were no youth league phenoms
mhm,
or bonus babies or any of that. Back then it was these guys were scrapping. They were working blue collar jobs right alongside the people who were the fans until they could finally make their way into the major leagues. And even then they were making three, four, maybe five times as much as the average worker. They weren't making 1,000 times more.
mhm.
And a lot of them had to work jobs in the off season, and nearly all of them had to work after they retired.
Yeah, I mean, there's a local author here that has gotten into, especially Arkansas baseball history, and, of course, a lot of that is from the 1910s, 20s, and stuff of that nature, that same type of time period, and just the players that at some point in time, could have had a chance to play in the major leagues and didn't go because they had an established job and they couldn't afford to go play baseball, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that was a really interesting part of the Bill Terry story, is that sort of his leverage with John McGraw when McGraw wanted him to join the Giants is look, I've got a good job, I have a house, I've got a family, I'm getting along fine. I mean, yeah, I'll do it if you're willing to pay me X amount. Uh, and McGraw was astonished. This kid is getting it. Who's playing in the low minor leagues is getting an offer to go play for the Giants, and he thinks he can negotiate. But Terry was, and uh, every new contract, Terry would take the same approach. I don't mind going home, and I own some rental properties. I'll be happy there. I mean, it's not not that big a difference to me, and that was a great point of leverage with McGraw.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because there was no, play for a pension, play for anything of that nature. It was, because you could play 1 game, 2 games. So, we all know Moonlight Graham, but others like that where you could just make an appearance and then never be seen again. It was a definitely a different time period. So, what was maybe one of the biggest surprises to you as you researched this book? What you found out?
Well, there were a lot of surprises. I mean, the enormity of the reserve clause. I mean, I sort of knew it in the
Mm,
abstract, but I didn't really understand how it kept players totally in the thrall of the owners. I think the surprise was that in a lot of ways it was good for the fans, even though it was obviously not good for the players and not
mhm,
fair to the players entirely. But what it did for the fans was stabilize the game. And so you could really invest in a player because he was going to be with that team probably for his whole career. So you could count on, next season he would be back, and we would be rooting for him and our team again. But the more free agency there was, obviously there was more, the more players were jumping from team to teams. That had actually existed for a while before the reserve clause, and a new league started that allowed players
mm,
to negotiate their own contracts, at will, and it resulted in players, swapping teams 2, 3, 4 times a year, and it really left the fans disgruntled because uh, they wanted to get involved with, feel a sense of loyalty and connection to a team and its players. And now they were just a bunch of mercenaries jumping from ship to ship, and so
yeah,
it made it harder for the fans to attach to the team. So the reserve clause did serve a positive function in the sense that it stabilized the game and gave the fans sort of something they could count on. What it also did is give the owners, almost total control of the players, and
mhm,
left the players with no negotiating lever except a refusal to play. I mean, Bill Terry could go back to
mhm.
uh, Louisiana, but he couldn't. He couldn't go play for another major league team. So that and they were all stuck with that.
Yeah, and so many of them, of course, you know, wanted to play so badly. I mean, that passion for the game was in them that they just kinda had to take what they get. I mean, again, you could try to push the edges here and there, but push came to shove, you were probably gonna take the owner's what the owner was giving you because you wanted to play baseball.
Wanted to play. I mean, and they understood it was a great privilege to play a game for a living and make more
Mhm,
money than the average person. I don't think I don't sense that very many of the players appreciate the privilege of it in quite the same sense. And uh, I mean, those guys were so invested in it. I mean, and it was to their detriment in some ways. I mean,
mhm,
guys would play injured because giving up a spot, in a
yeah,
major league lineup was just unthinkable. And especially during the Depression. I mean, even if you were only making 3 times the average worker, you had a steady job, good money, and half the year off to do something else. So I mean, you didn't want to lose that.
yeah, and I mean, you referenced probably the most famous example of that in your book with, Wally Pipp and Lou Gehrig. Pip sits out for a game. And now it didn't end his career, but it ended his starting in New York. Obviously he didn't have the career that he was going to have.
Well, that's right. And there were, and it's true of others who,
Mhm.
the stories that they stayed and played when they probably shouldn't have. They probably should have taken themselves out of the lineup. Chuck Klein was a great player, best hitter in the National League, probably. But, he tried to play through a leg injury after he got traded and had a what was considered a very large contract, he wanted to perform for the fans in Chicago, and uh, so he felt he couldn't take time out to heal from his injury, and he played through it and did a lot of damage, and his career sort of went downhill from there, and
Mhm.
so did his life.
Yeah, and unfortunately, again, as we're saying, the loyalty that the owners had to the players only extended to how well they played on the field, because once they were no longer useful there was, they were traded or released or whatever the case may be. They really weren't considered much more, I don't think, than just, kind of property for the most part. I'm sure there were some that had personal connections, but for the most part, I don't really get that sense when I read the history of that time.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. The greatest evidence of that, I mean, I guess this actually the single most shocking fact to me was that Babe Ruth, who was by far the biggest box office draw in the history of the major leagues, and he
Mhm.
made the Yankees into a financial powerhouse. They could have never paid him enough, even though they paid him. He was the highest paid player in baseball by today's standards. It's hard to imagine how many hundreds of millions Babe Ruth would have been paid. But when he retired, they essentially turned their back on him. He, you know, wrote in or called in that he wanted to attend a game early in this first season after he retired, and the message back was, "Well, you can buy a ticket for the same price as anybody else." Instead of
Yeah.
providing him with a box seat, which they should have done for life.
Mhm.
Uh, they told him you can buy a ticket, and so he almost never went back to Yankee Stadium after that
Yeah.
until they finally had Babe Ruth Day when he was
Yeah.
an old and dying man.
Yeah. Well, and I know, of course, he pushed hard to get, managing jobs. I think with the Yankees, but maybe also with Brooklyn, and it never really panned out in a way that it probably would today, if nothing else, for the marketing standpoint
Yeah,
of having, the greatest player. Well, and I don't want to say it this way because it's a little bit different, but if Albert Pujols ever gets a managing job somewhere, um, besides the fact he does have a managerial chops, he's gonna have that pull of being a legend in the dugout.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, and it is inexplicable that the Yankees wouldn't give Babe a chance. I mean, there were many reasons for it, I guess, that they would use. But Connie Mack almost hired Babe to manage his athletics, but his excuse for that years later was that, well, in 2 weeks, Claire Ruth, Babe's wife, would have been running the team. So I don't know if that's, but Babe did get a job as a first base coach for the Brooklyn Dodgers. He only
Mhm.
got that because he showed up at a Dodgers game, and the management was astounded that he brought down the house just by taking his seat. He was still so popular that he got a level of applause no player got who was actually still in the game. They thought, well, let's have him out there. So they had him. Uh, Hired him to coach first base, and he thought that was going to be his path into a job as a manager. But in
Mhm.
fact, they just wanted him to be out there, to you know wave to the crowd and you know you know jibe with the players. But they were never going to give him a chance to manage,
No,
and
he was a
uh,
mascot more than
so
anything.
it really broke his heart.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's I mean, it is almost inconceivable the way that happened back then, but game has changed as much as we like to talk about the similarities, and the game on the field. It has a lot of similarities, right? You're still trying to score runs, you're still trying to hit the ball, you're still trying to strike people out, but off the field, and the relationships and everything else like that, and marketing, and that's its place in America is so different that it's hard to look back at those times and really understand what they were thinking.
Well, yeah, and well, that was part of the intention of the book was to
Mm.
capture what baseball was to America in that time, and it was, as we both said, it was, the end all be all of sports in America. It was the national game. People followed it and loved it in a way that transcended virtually all other sports together when this first All-Star game was played, and then no one thought it was the first All-Star game. It was supposed to be a one-off exhibition, the game of the century. It was billed as back in the day when that was not a cliche. No one had ever used the phrase before. Um, so I mean, and so the media coverage, which is newspaper coverage, uh, was far greater than it had ever been for any American sporting event previously. Um, which I mean, every paper sports section was just covered with that game. I mean, the entire front page of the sports section was that game. Um, so it was that big an event for the country.
So, what do you think about the All-Star game now? I mean, it's obviously so different with fan voting and so many extra players, and like you said, interleague play taking a little bit of the shine off of it. But what are your thoughts about it?
Well, I mean, the pure part is that the game itself. I mean, the
Mhm,
bases are still 90 feet apart. Pitcher's mound is still 60 feet 6 inches from home plate, and uh, that all that has been preserved, and people can, you really can't, take that away. The game is still the game, and what people love about it, remains intact. The money part of it, is what has changed so dramatically. There's just enormously more money, and considering that baseball isn't even the most popular sport anymore, uh, you know, it's amazing. But so I mean, how could somebody really relate to the guy next door? I mean, they are living, in
mhm.
neighborhoods with, regular people around them, like the players did back then. But when you're making $100 million a year, or even $25 million a year, you're very separated from the average person. And I think that has changed, and they figured out so many ways to monetize the game, and of course they're going to exploit all of them. I mean, they all want to make as much money as possible. Uh, which I mean, on the one hand, you can't blame them. On the other hand, it does sort of sap the soul of the game.
Yeah, but I feel like that's probably something that is actually a pretty good through line through the the whole baseball history, right? I mean, owners trying to either make a buck either by bringing in the money or not spending it, one of the two. It always has seemed to be that way.
That's true, but making a buck. I mean, these guys a lot of the time were just scraping out.
Yeah.
I mean, they weren't making. I mean, they were making good money for sometimes. Connie Mack, though, I mean, once the depression hit, he was stuck with a loser, and he was losing money year after year, and drained his finances to the point of exhaustion, and many other owners suffered a similar fate. I mean, the
Mhm.
Yankees were spared because they had made so much money during the 20s with Babe Ruth, and they still had Babe Ruth as the greatest draw on the road in the history of baseball. Um, but lots of other of those owners were, I mean, they were just struggling to put people in the
Yeah.
seats. They were desperate to
Yeah.
put people in the seats, and so they resorted to a lot of various gimmicks to try to put people in the seats. But they weren't like the owners of today. They weren't billionaires or
Yeah.
anything close.
Yeah. A lot more family-owned businesses back then, I guess, if you will say. I mean, which is different and not managed as a business as much as a hobby, which is, I guess, what we have talked about sometimes as fans now is as much as we appreciate when our team is smart and does smart things, I think we've lost something with the idea of having to maximize every individual thing, and not just seeing what the game has.
Well, I agree, and like mentioned before, I mean, going to interleague play
Mhm.
really took a lot out of the drama and excitement of the All Star game.
Yeah.
It's the single thing that most you know made the All Star game not so significant, and but it was done because it was a way to make more money, to
Yeah.
get more fans in the seats, more television revenue, etc.
And it's taken, I think, maybe just a little bit off the World Series as well, because it used to be these two teams you never would meet except for in October. Well, now, especially with this balanced schedule, everybody's going to have played. If you get to the World Series, you're going to have played that opponent at some point in time in the year, and that's a little bit different.
It is different. I mean, it's more in line, you could say, with the NFL or the NBA. But
Mhm.
then again, I'm someone who believes baseball should preserve, all the things about it that make it unique and so deeply connected to our past. And I really think it was a mistake to go to interleague play, and I wish they hadn't done it.
Yeah, well, you and I are on the same page on that one for sure. Because I've been complaining about interleague play since it started, and the wild cards and everything else. I mean, of course, growing up as a child of the '80s, and 4 divisions. Even that was a departure from true history of the game, but at least it made a little bit of sense to me growing up then. To
Yeah,
see
I
all the
agree.
changes now,
I agree. I
different.
mean, they were adding teams. I mean, the
Mhm,
traditional, 8 teams in 2 leagues, was changed when you began to
mhm,
add teams. So I understand going to divisions and the divisional play, even,
mhm,
I mean, even though when people talk season records, it's, I mean, those, up until, I mean, for many years, the postseason was the World Series, and so
right.
what you did in the World Series was so definitive of players back then. I mean,
Mhm,
people remembered that about a player, almost as much as what their season records were. How you came through in the World Series was defining. And I don't think it is as much now.
I mean, I know that Bill Mazeroski had a good career, but I don't know that his name is remembered if it's not for that home run in the World Series.
Yeah, well, that's
That
true.
that kind of thing. So, all right. Well, it's been fun. Now you've written this one. Are you going to dive into another part of baseball history, or are you going to get out of that realm?
I don't have a straight answer there. I mean, I do have an idea for another baseball book, but I haven't been willing to commit to it because I just am not sure about writing
Mhm,
another baseball book. If you read my, you know, resume, I
yeah.
don't repeat myself. I try to do
No.
something very different the next time out. But the only good idea I've had for a new book that excites me is another baseball book. So I just don't know if I'll pull the trigger on that or not. For the moment, I'm distracted by some Hollywood stuff, and
Mhm.
so I don't have to I have to rush into the decision because I have to uh, deal with that. But so I just don't know.
Well, I mean, like I said, I've read a quarter. I'm going to finish it up. If you, I hope you get back to it because this has been a really exciting read. And I haven't even gotten to the ball game yet.
Yeah,
I
I know.
mean, this is
Oh,
just the lead up, and it's
I'm,
that good. So
yeah,
I would love to see you do it again.
yeah, I've been very gratified by the response and by the response of baseball people, baseball historians, the Saber people, and others. I mean, I feel really good that they, uh, don't feel like I intruded on their turf, but that I
Mhm,
really honored, uh, you know, them and what they were doing in the game.
for sure. Well, and I happen to wind up with 2 copies. So if anybody listening is interested, if you'll send me your name before the first pitch of the All Star game next week, we'll see about giving away one of these as well because it's really worth reading. So, Mr. Sullivan, I really appreciate you coming on tonight and talking about this, and it's been a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for having me.
What do you want to play, Sam?
We're going to play Take Me Out to the Ball Game. We're all going to sing it too.